everyone, and welcome to Milwaukee's Tailgate Brewers podcast, part of the MKE Tailgate Network. This is episode 366. I'm James. I'm joined by Ryan and Spencer this week, who's stepping in for Paul this weekend. Spencer, how you been since the last time you were on the show?
Been doing well. Started our winter practices, our late night practices this past week. So long week for me, especially just getting used to the schedule. But otherwise, yeah, been really good. I'm in full on baseball mode now, which is always nice.
Nice.
It's good to be in that mode. I've been waiting to get in that mode for a couple months now. The break was nice, but now I'm all baseball all the time, pretty much through October. So I'm looking forward to that. And yeah, otherwise everything's been good.
I've kind of been curious, like, what is coaching college baseball in Wisconsin like? Because obviously it was like 10 below the other week. You can't go outside. So do you have indoor facilities where you are, or what do you do?
Yeah, we're all over the place, but we do indoor stuff. Unfortunately, it's usually going to be at like 9 at night, and then we're done close to midnight most nights.
Oh boy.
Just because we're not in season. The teams that are in season get the gym. We've worked out kind of deals with different academies to let us use their facilities in exchange for using our field in summer and those types of things. But we still don't get good times for those. So no matter what, we're late practices, and yeah, it's all indoors. But if we find anything, it's supposed to be 40 at one point during the week, we're going to be outside. We're going to be getting something in just to get a more open space, get some fly balls for the outfielders. That's one of the main things, honestly, is they don't get to see a fly ball till we play a game if it's too cold. So just that type of stuff. But it's not a fun schedule, but you get used to it. Week one's always the toughest. I'm sure I'll be a lot better moving forward.
Teach anybody an airbender or a splitter yet?
We actually have somebody who throws pretty much an airbender for the D3 level
awesome.
of that.
A D3 airbender.
I didn't have to teach him. He just did it coming in, so it's great. But no, I haven't. We don't add too many now at this point in winter. We do more of the pitch additions or subtractions in fall so that they actually can work on it heading into the winter, because now we're pretty much in game mode. We play in 4 weeks from today. So yeah.
So is his airbender actually a screwball?
He basically he calls it a changeup. He throws it with a changeup grip. It's very similar to what Devin does, but Devin's throwing a screwball. So yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was thinking about back to the days of having to get ice time. My brothers both played hockey, and they would always get ice time at the worst times. Though, I mean, for your life, it's not ideal, but for college kids, getting 9 to 12 at night, that's like 4 to 6 for like normal people. Like when you're in college,
Fair.
9 to midnight, like they're not going to bed for another 6 hours anyway. So
yeah, but they'd rather be somewhere else at 9 to midnight and probably not in a gym, right? So yeah.
They can go out and get to the parties late then. Show up fashionably late. So
that's true. Bar times too. That's fine.
Yeah. So anyways, James, I have to get your story here. So I was in La Crosse this weekend, and we went with my in-laws out to the Freight House, which is a very well-known old restaurant in town there. It's been around forever, and one of the nicer places in town to go to. It's actually where we had my rehearsal dinner, because it was right across
Passes
the way.
for fancy in La Crosse. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of good restaurants in La Crosse too. There's other stuff besides that, but Freight House is kind of like the OG of the good restaurants. But you said you had a story, and I got to hear the story.
Yeah. So the Freight House is a steakhouse, if you didn't know that. Sort of like a supper clubbish steakhouse, but not necessarily a veggie forward, I would say. And my wife is a vegetarian, and she's, is very good natured about it. Is usually like, I can find something on every menu, even if it's just sides, right? Like she's perfectly happy just having French fries for dinner kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Freight House is a steakhouse, so there's not a lot of non-beef options even. So, I took her there because it was like, we got to go to the Freight House at least once when I take you to La Crosse, right? I'm from the La Crosse area, just outside La Crosse. You got to, as you experience it, go to the Freight House once. So I have whatever steak dinner because I'm like, what the hell? It's a nice occasion. They did have a vegetarian option, which is like their vegetarian entree.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very much, if you haven't gone, it's like, what would somebody who lives on nothing but steak imagine a vegetarian dinner to be like? Well, it's like, we got to give them enough to like fill up, right? Like, who's going to fill up on veggies? So it's literally a plate full of like asparagus, a whole ass artichoke, and just layered veggies, like way too much food for any one person. But it's like somebody said, oh, I don't know what those people eat, but just fill a plate full of vegetables. Like it is a pound of asparagus. I swear to God, because I had to take like half of it. And it was great. She loved the artichoke. She never gets artichoke anywhere else. It was fantastic. It was fresh. It was good, but it was way too much food. And it's basically just because meat eaters don't know like how vegetarians can survive. That was our takeaway.
That sounds 100%. Yeah. And I saw it on the menu last night when you mentioned that she's a vegetarian. That was as much as I do. I saw the vegetarian thing and I'm like, I'm curious what would actually be on that right now. So
it was a giant plate of vegetables. She's got a picture. I'll send it to the G chat. It's memorable. We're still telling the story clearly like 3 years later. So that was a fun time, but glad you went to the Freight House. Glad you have the memories. Hope you enjoyed your time in lacrosse. I believe it's the canon of this podcast that lacrosse is just fine. Going back a few years.
Yep, that's what Steve Garshinsky says. Yeah, it's fine. Lacrosse is fine.
It's got a few good restaurants. It's got some more breweries popping up. I don't know if you made it down to 608 like you usually do.
Oh yeah, I brought back $100 worth of beer. I did.
There we go. I always, when I'm in the lacrosse area, if I don't make it to 608, I at least stop at a Quick Trip and get, some Pearl Street Brewery stuff, some of the local stuff. But yeah, glad you were able to stop there. But good weekend. Sounds like a good time. But yeah, I don't know if I'd be taking my wife back to the Freight House. We need a little more options than that, I think. But awesome. All right. Not a whole lot of Brewers news this week, but a couple of things, a couple of signings. For a second, I thought it was the Brewers' first full-on major league signing, but turns out it's another split contract. But we'll talk about that in a minute. First of all, a reminder, patrons get question priority both on this podcast and on reporting as eligible. All you have to do is go to patreon.com/MKE tailgate. $2 a month guarantees you get your questions answered both on this podcast and on reporting as eligible. $5 gets you the question priority, plus the additional exclusive content. Ryan, Spencer, I know you guys have been trying to get another podcast in the books here for the minor league extra. I failed to check before we started this, but did you record something?
We did.
What did you talk about? Okay.
Yeah, we did. We did record, and we spent most of the time, we went long as usual. We ended up talking mostly about the international signing period. So went through a lot of those guys in quite a bit of detail. So Spencer had information about a majority of the class. Really, there were it was just kind of the last guys on the list, the last 10 or so guys on the list that we didn't have much on. But other than that, Spencer had done a lot of internet sleuthing, so we had quite a bit to discuss with those guys, and definitely now much more informed about what's going on with that class. So very exciting. It looks like the Brewers did another Brewers international class here, though maybe with Spencer a little bit more pitching this time than maybe they have, or at least in terms of investment, a little more investment in pitching.
Yeah, I think money-wise, they definitely put more into pitching than I can remember. So that's an interesting change, and some other changes we talked about potentially in the way they attacked some of the top of the class. But yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I did talk a lot.
I mean, they've obviously done really well there recently, aside from obviously Jackson Chourio. Jesus Mate is apparently a top 20 prospect according to Baseball America now, and he's not even 18, right? So it seems like maybe they did the Chourio thing again. I don't know. I'm excited. I know the Brewers are touting that, Spencer, but I guess quickly before we get into other things, your thoughts on maybe the prospect rankings and just how high Jesus Mate is being ranked going into this season. It's kind of wild for a kid that young.
Yeah, it is wild because he has not even played in the United States yet. He hasn't played in full season ball yet.
Yeah.
And even just relative to where Churio was age-wise, he's like 2 months younger than where Churio was at this time in his career. He's born in May. Churio was born in March, so he has a chance to. I don't even want to say chance. He's almost certainly going to start in Low A Carolina this year as a 17-year-old for the full first month. So it'll be a full season ball, 17-year-old.
That's wild.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about it, but it's crazy surface stat numbers. It's crazy under the hood numbers. It's a great athlete. There's a lot to like. I mean, it's still too early to totally put the Churio tag on him, but it's hard not to, given what we're seeing so far. So yeah, I can't wait to actually be able to watch him play games in a few months here, because that's going to be fun, whether it's going great or not. You learn a lot more about somebody when you can watch them more regularly, and you get to see how they handle struggles, how they handle everything else. So yeah, definitely very excited.
Yeah, Jeff Ponce mentioned on the Baseball America podcast, he was running down some numbers of that Mate was the only player in the entire minor leagues who was putting up his combination of hard hit balls and not chasing and in zone contact. So his levels of in zone contact, not chasing, and then how hard the ball was being hit, there wasn't anybody else in the minor leagues that was putting up numbers like him. He was one of one in terms of that stuff. So you got to see it against more full season pitching, more advanced pitching than what you get in the DSL. But man, the indications are really, really good. Really good.
It's hard to, kind of tap the brakes on that excitement, as we tried to do with Jackson Churio for, what was it, like a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And then he came up in second half of last year. We saw it. And now I think we might talk about it a little bit later. The expectations are still sky high for somebody that age, and the fact they might be doing it again. I don't know. Maybe it's just easier to buy into it because you've seen them succeed once before on a path like this, right? Like they can do it. And obviously, if the bat to ball skills are there, that's what you worry about the most, outside of maybe where he plays defensively. But even at that age, if you can just make contact, that's a success.
Yeah, I mean, this time, if he is putting up big numbers, I think we're going to be a lot less cautious about it the way we were with True, where it's like, well, we still got to see him move up and do it against higher level pitching and all that stuff. I think if he comes out of the gates firing the way that Churio came out of the gates firing at Low A, it's going to be hard to restrain. I'm going to have trouble restraining.
No, I know. I'm like dreaming of Braun Fielder all over again, the right-left combo, right? Like that's dream.
Well, Mate's even a switchy, so yeah.
Oh, he's a switchy. Yeah. I've only seen the highlights of him batting lefty. That makes sense. Not a lot of lefties probably faced so far. But man, that still the strong side of the platoon being left-handed, that'd be a game changer for sure. How long have we wanted a left-handed power hitter outside of wishing Christian Yelich would pull it? Like that's the dream right there. Mm-hmm. Anyway, plenty of talk about Jesus Mate, probably on minor league extras to come. So be sure to sign up for that $5 a month value there. I'm sure you'll be getting monthly, if not weekly, updates on that once the games start. Definitely would be worth the MLB, package to watch the minor league games as well, just to even turn on the Bugcats games. A lot of fun when the Brewers aren't playing. I do that myself. All right. Talking big league club, obviously another relatively quiet offseason week for the Brewers, although as we did mention, they made a couple of minor signings. They first brought in veteran catcher Jorge Alfaro on a minor league deal, and they signed pitcher Elvin Rodriguez to a split major league deal with a team option for a second year. Rodriguez spent the last year overseas. To make room for him on the 40-man roster, they DFA JB Bukauskas, a favorite of the podcast, even if he's pitched seldom at the big league level due to health issues. But he did end up clearing waivers and was outright of the minors. So at least for now, it looks like he'll stick around in the organization, which is fun to see. I know a couple of us have been at least intrigued by what he has offered, even if we haven't seen a ton of him at the major league level. So we'll talk about Rodriguez in a second here, using Spencer's knowledge as a pitching coach. But first, I want to talk about Alfaro, because obviously he's a former top 100 prospect way back in the day. He's entering his age 32 season now. So quite a bit removed from those days. But if the Brewers love anything more than reverse platoon splits, it's probably a former top 100 prospect, right? A post-hype prospect. This would be very post-hype. And he's probably, just going to be AAA filler, I imagine, Spencer. But any thoughts on adding him, especially as we look at, Jefferson Caro also likely spending most of the year at AAA?
Yeah, first of all, I mean, the Brewers did need another catcher in the upper minors, so that was part of it. They had been tied. I remember earlier in the offseason, Robert Murray had tied him to the catching market, even after Haas had been, not non-tendered. He had gone through everything. So everyone was a little confused by that. My assumption was that they were looking for somebody like this, somebody who could be a vet in AAA. He's got a good arm. He's had, random stints of success offensively in MLB. I remember for some reason, he just kept hitting clutch homers for the Padres. I don't know how many years ago that was, but he just kept doing it for no reason. But there's experience. He's got a good arm. I think the main thing is, one, they needed that depth in AAA, but two, if there's an early injury to Haas or Contreras, this gives them an experienced option to come in and take that secondary role as a catcher and not have to force Caro up before they might feel he's ready, especially given he lost the whole season and everything else. This just gives them a third catcher who can come in and hold down a spot if needed, and not just have Caro come in and be, a backup right away coming up to MLB. So it's mostly depth. It really is just depth, but it's depth for AAA and for MLB, I think.
Yeah, do we have an answer as to why Alfaro didn't play at all in 2024? I'm looking right now. He didn't play in the minors or the majors. There's no record of him having played anywhere. Was he hurt? He must have been hurt, right?
Yeah, I didn't realize that. He must have been. I have no idea.
Yeah, he didn't play at all in and he was very poor offensively in 2023 when he split time a couple different places. Yeah, he was with the Colorado and Boston. He hardly played, though. He, in 2023, a grand total of 52 plate appearances, which were forgettable. But, I mean, in 2022 with the Padres, he got 274 plate appearances and put up a 90 WRC+. So he's just 10% less than league average. So that would be a fine backup catcher. But I just don't know what's gone on since. I was trying to figure that out while you're sitting here talking.
No idea.
Yeah, he seems to be a capable defender, and that's kind of what you want in a third catcher. And frankly, I think that this is more of a like Jefferson Caro insurance. If Caro isn't ready, if something is going on there, or if something happens really early and you need a backup catcher or you need, some catching depth, I think the hope would be if you needed somebody towards, say, the middle or end of the season, that it would be Caro, that he would be the guy. So I think that, that obviously those are the three with Contreras, Haas, and then and Caro. Those are the three who are on the 40-man. So, yeah, Alfaro, if we see much of him in the big leagues, I would be surprised. Seems like if it came down to, we need to rely on him, they would start looking around pretty quickly for other options. I think this is more just minor league depth and, an emergency fill-in sort of situation.
It looks like the Cubs did sign Alfaro to a minor league contract last winter, and then they released him on March 25th. So I don't know if that was a deal where he just opted for free agency and nobody picked him up, or if he was hurt or what happened. But yeah, he didn't, according to the transaction log on his MLB.com page, didn't sign anywhere until he played winter ball this November. So interesting.
Yeah, now this is a definite mystery. Guys don't just have like missing seasons all of a sudden where they just disappear off the face of the earth. This is a bit strange. You'd think you would have gone and played somewhere.
Yeah, unless he wanted to just take a beat. I don't know. Interesting. We'll have to do more digging on that. Well, I'll keep Googling as you guys talk. But first, so Elvin Rodriguez obviously spent a year overseas, has some big league experience. I think the fact that the Brewers gave him a contract, split contract. So, difference in pay between majors and minors, like we've seen with like Wolfram and a couple of others over the last few years. But they gave him an option for a second year, which I guess to me, Spencer, tells me they saw something that maybe is intriguing. Is there anything there, or is he just kind of another arm to shuttle back and forth if they need one.
Yeah, I think there's interesting traits that he possesses. I mean, I've talked about this before, but I always take note when somebody like the Rays had their hands on you at one point. It means they were interested in you as well. So when teams like that, sometimes the Rays, the Guardians, those types of teams, Yankees, if they filter them through, it's not surprising to me that the Brewers are also interested in them because they tend to value similar things. The main thing with Rodriguez is probably is he gets about as much carry as anybody on his fastball. It can get up to around 20 inches of induced vertical break. It's only a 93 to 94 mile per hour offering for the most part for him, but it's one of those pitches that can work well at the top of the zone. He throws a pretty good breaking ball that had really big whiff rates on it in AAA a couple of years ago. His changeup also gets pretty good swing and miss. He has struggled with command, and that's not just walks, but it's also just leaving pitches in hittable spots. That was an issue for him with the Rays, and every time he's come up to MLB, it's been an issue for him. But the stuff has been pretty good. He went over to Japan. He had a sub-2 ERA. I did not see anything that really changed dramatically. I'm sure they have more data than I was able to find in the Brewers organization, but yeah, it's an interesting arm. I think it's somebody who I could very easily see being a reliever throughout the year, kind of on the shuttle, like you talked about. There's maybe a little bit of like a Tobias Myers type of repertoire if you work on certain things. If you maybe try and sharpen up the cutter, throw it harder, then there's a lot of similarities to what Tobias does with his stuff. So maybe they'll try and take it that direction. I'm not entirely sure, but I do know he's got 5 pitches that are all pretty interesting. And whenever that's the case, the Brewers love that type of profile. They love their kitchen sink guys. And especially when the kitchen sink guys it's not just like 5 meh pitches. It's 5, oh yeah, okay, there's something there with each of those. Maybe we tinker with it a little bit, change it up. But he's interesting. I'm glad they held on to Bukauskas because I was a little upset that he ended up getting DFA'd in that move. I've been a Bukauskas guy for a long time. I also wonder what's going on with him health-wise because that was really weird heading down the stretch last year. I mean, he just never got healthy, and they kept thinking he was going to get healthy. So I wonder if maybe that's still cropping up this offseason. So they took him off the 40-man. Obviously, he went unclaimed, and they were able to keep him in the organization. So in the end, I think you have 2 interesting arms then because I still view Bukauskas as one, and I think Rodriguez is one. I just don't really know what they're planning to do with it. I think they could go a lot of different directions with him, and we'll see what they end up doing. It's going to be an interesting one for me to follow, especially if he's in AAA, just kind of how the StatCast stuff is reading early on in the season.
Yeah, I don't have a whole ton to add here because, yeah, obviously you know a lot more about the stuff than I do. One thing that did strike me as interesting was he gave up 1 home run in 88 innings last year. Mm-hmm. Decent, solid-ish, 2.81 strikeouts to walks. So, yeah, I'd like to see numbers up around 3. Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting profile. When the Brewers grab someone like this, especially like Jaymes, you said, when they added that extra year, the option for the extra year, that sounds like they see something. Like the fact that they bothered to try to get that extra year to figure out terms for that extra year makes me think they see something here. So, yeah, it definitely bears watching to see what's going on with that. But he improved a lot from 2023 to 2024 in terms of what he was doing in Japan. Like his numbers came way down and got a lot better in 2024 versus where they were in 2023. So, yeah, I'm curious. It's interesting.
Elsewhere in the league, I think it seems like everyone's still complaining about the Dodgers in some way or another. So obviously a couple of weeks ago, they added Roki Sasaki through the international system. This past week, they gave Tanner Scott, a closer, $75 million to kind of blow everyone out of the water. The Cubs and others had been kind of poking around Tanner Scott, but I don't know if anyone was willing to give him $75 million to pitch 1 inning a game. But the Dodgers can do that because they're the Dodgers. So on top of that, though, they apparently have an agreement to also add a former All-Star closer in Kirby Yates to their bullpen. Whether or not Kirby Yates is washed is probably up to discussion. And as far as I know, that deal hasn't been finalized. So I don't know if there's physical issues or not. But obviously, Dodgers keep pouring money into their problems to at least fill the gaps that they had at the end of last year. Yes, they won the World Series, but it's not like their pitching was in great shape by the end of it. So at least in my view, it's defensible in that they're trying to at least address some holes that they still had. Other people are upset, but at the same time, in the last week, we also had people complaining about other owners crying poor instead of signing their own free agents. We had, some of the usual actors talking about that and complaining about the Pirates and small market teams in general, yada, yada. So I'm kind of tired of seeing this relitigated every offseason. Ryan, I know you wanted to talk about it. So which is it? Are the Dodgers evil and ruining baseball by spending too much money, or are the other owners just crying poor and ruining baseball in their own way?
Well, the first thing I want to do is to direct everybody who has access to it, obviously. Paul talked about this for the first 5-10 minutes of his mini pod this week, because he wanted to talk about Joe Sheehan and some of the points that Joe Sheehan is making about this. And yeah, I think I largely fall, at least as far as it goes with what he was talking about there, I largely fall along the lines of Paul here, which is basically like, there doesn't seem to be, among people like Sheehan who have a good point up to a point, there doesn't seem to be a lot of acknowledgement that there are huge revenue differences between the Brewers and the Dodgers, and the Brewers can't just go out and spend, like, this isn't a matter of just like going and spending money, because the Dodgers aren't spending their billionaires' money. The Dodgers are spending their revenue. The Dodgers are spending from the revenue that they're making. It's just that, because they're in LA and they have a $300 million a year TV contract, they have a hell of a lot more revenue than the Milwaukee Brewers on their, what was something in the neighborhood of 50, but now it's definitely not 50, right, Spencer? Last night, it's more like 30
Last
now?
we heard, it was 30, and it's probably going down from there. So it was already 10 times. It might be more now.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, and this is a thing that has bugged me for a long time, because I generally fall on the side of, I'm not for a salary cap. I don't think that's actually going to help. I think that when people talk about parity in baseball, they see the big salary differences, the big payroll differences between teams, and they don't actually look at the fact that, no, there's as much parity in baseball in terms of results, in terms of outcomes, as there is in the NBA or the NFL. Those create dynasties. Those leagues create dynasties, and they create, like repeat champions. And baseball, because of just the randomness of the postseason, that automatically kind of helps some of this. And the Dodgers have been at this for how long, and they've won. Yeah, they've made the postseason 13,
but they won 2 World Series in
Right.
the last 30 years.
Yeah,
The Yankees haven't won since 2009.
Yeah. So this idea that you can just like buy your way to a World Series, it's nonsense. You can buy sort of your way towards being one of the teams in the conversation, which they do, and that's largely because they also do it really well. Like the Dodgers do everything well. So I get frustrated with that, and then just the idea that people need to acknowledge that the way baseball's salary structure works, you can do a hell of a lot with $100 million, about where the Brewers are spending. If you do it well, you can do a lot with $100 million, where spending 3 times that much is not going to get you 3 times the the production, or 3 times whatever. If you spend well and smartly, you can do a lot, as is evidenced by Cleveland, who spends less than the Brewers on, most of the time. Tampa definitely spends less than the Brewers basically all the time. These teams compete in, year out in the regular season. And yeah, the issue kind of is like going deep into the playoffs. And that's an answer that we don't really have right now. It does seem like once you get into the deeper rounds of the playoffs, that having spent more seems to be something of an advantage, though we're talking about such a small sample size that it doesn't really apply. So Spencer, I want to give you a chance to talk here, because I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, I mean, off to the side here, I have the Bills and Chiefs playing each other on my TV screen for like the 5th time in a row, I think, for the AFC
Right.
Championship. So this is not just a baseball thing. This is not something where you can't create, dynasties like we talked about. But I do think I agree with everything you said there. I don't think baseball should have a salary cap. I don't think there's any need for it. I think they've got to find a better way to even out the revenue sharing a little bit, and in terms of something along the lines of the Dodgers having, I think it was last reported at $340 million for their TV contract. So they're starting their payroll basically. If they want to just say, hey, we're only putting the TV revenue to our payroll, they're starting that at $340 million, and the Brewers are starting at 30 max. I can't imagine it went up from where it was the last time it was reported. So that's already, I mean, it wouldn't shock me if currently the Dodgers are closer to 20 times what the Brewers have in TV revenue heading into next season than even 10. Like that would not be a surprise to me if we found that number out later. It's a really big deal. I mean, that's where most of this comes from. I think the issue is you're never going to get owners to agree to better revenue sharing if they think the smaller markets are going to just pocket the difference. So I still think a floor and better revenue sharing is probably the only way this ends up going as well as everyone wants without a cap. But I don't think any of that's happening anytime soon, to be completely honest. I just don't see it happening. They're going to try at the next CBA. They're going to try. I'm sure it's going to be probably not the most fun for fans, as it usually is not when they come up.
We're going to get locked out again. Yep.
Yeah, there's a pretty good chance of it. But yeah, I like Ryan said, I think over the course of a regular season, that type of money almost guarantee you a playoff spot. And I think maybe that's where people start getting a little more annoyed. It's like, well, these teams might not be winning the World Series, but they're basically going to win their division or make the playoffs every year. And then that gives them a chance over these other teams. I get that. I do. There aren't too many of these smaller market teams making it consistently. The Brewers are basically the only ones who have for the last, 7-ish years outside of 1 year.
Sure.
But you can do it. It's not a complete, non-starter. You can do it. The Brewers are showing that you can do it. So get in the playoffs, see what happens. Like you said, the Dodgers have won twice. One of them was the COVID year, a very weird playoff situation without fans in most of the games. And the Yankees haven't won since the first year CC Sabathia was there, to put a reference on the timing. Like,
yes,
that's how long.
And he just went into the Hall of Fame. Yes, I was in New York for that year, and that was like they were starved after 8-9 years of not having a World Series title. So, like, yeah, just to put that in perspective.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I did mention on Blue Sky that there was something a little bit different about the Roki Sasaki thing, and I don't even know truly I still don't know truly how to articulate how I feel about this. It's sort of like, if the Dodgers want to spend $70 million to get Tanner Scott, go with God.
Fine.
You go ahead and spend a big chunk of money on a relief pitcher that, has been kind of up and down and whatever. You go ahead and do that, see how that works out for you. Great. The Sasaki thing is more frustrating because that wasn't money. That wasn't what it was. Just Sasaki chose to go there, and
he wanted to go there.
Yeah, because he wanted to go there, because of course he did. And I bear no ill will towards him. If I was in his position, that's probably where I would want to go to. And I'm generally in favor of players having the freedom to go where they want. I'm generally in favor of the freedom of player movement like that. But that one, it just is a little bit rough, because it's like they're going above and beyond, and they didn't need that. The Dodgers didn't need Roki Sasaki. And I'm not saying,
they needed a starter.
No, they have Jaymes. They have like 15 starters. It's just a lot of them are kind of hurt or coming off of injury or whatever.
Yeah, they have 15 starters who are going to throw 70 innings because their arms explode every year.
Yeah, I mean, there's some truth to that, but also just like they going and doing what they did last year. They have more than made up for like the shortfalls and whatever, but they just didn't need, you know what I mean? Like, they didn't need the advantage that Sasaki is conferring on them, but they got it just because they already, it's like they've now become like the collapsing star, where like everything is just sucked into the vortex of their, and I'm probably screwing that up. I'm sorry. I'm not a big astronomy guy, but like it's just like everything is sort of the gravity
Yeah.
is just pulling everything to them right now, and I get it that's like part of why they do everything as well as they do to get those things, but this just wasn't an advantage they needed, and so that one just kind of bugs me. But like I don't think like making him subject to some sort of international draft would be fair to
No.
him either. Like I don't think
No.
he should have to get stuck with the friggin' White Sox or something like
Right.
that. That's not that's not fair either. So I don't know that there is a good solution to it, but that one did. Like this rose to a level where it bugged me. I don't mind when the Dodgers pay to get their toys, but when somebody just hands them a toy for free, well, essentially free, that did make me go, okay, I don't like this so much. It's a little annoying.
I mean, but that's part of free agency, right? Like the players can go to where they want to go. Players want to go play for the Dodgers right now, A, because they're awesome and have the best chance at a ring. B, because you're playing with Hall of Famers. Everybody wants to sit there and play with Ohtani and Betts and Freeman and everybody else. You're not going to stop that. You know, you still have the ring chasers in the NBA too, right? You have it to a lesser extent in the NFL, but you'll still see it when, you know, guys are released ahead of the trade deadline or whatever, and you go and chase a ring. You know, how many veterans have signed on with the Chiefs and the Bills just to try to catch a ring this year, right? I mean, to some extent, you're always going to have that. I don't know if I can fault them for Sasaki. Yes, they have certain advantages in that they're on the West Coast. Players from Asia want to be closer to home, typically, and there are a limited number of teams in that area. You know, it was the Dodgers and the Padres, basically, right? And once the Padres started signing other guys on January 15th or 16th, that was the tell that they knew they were out, right?
Mhm.
Like, so
Yeah.
I get that. I get being disappointed that you didn't feel like you had a chance at this generational pitcher, but I mean, that's the way that system goes.
Mhm.
And to some extent, it kind of reinforces the point. If you are competitive and if you're competing for a World Series every year, players are going to want to play with you. You know, like the Bucks still have a chance at an NBA Finals run. You know, they've got Dame, but now Bradley Beal's like, hey, I want to go join Milwaukee. Like that doesn't happen in another universe. So I don't know. It's hard to fault them on that.
No, I know. I figured it out. The expression, I had to double check to make sure it was the correct expression, but it definitely is. This is gilding the lily. This is gilding the lily is what it is doing. The Dodgers were already, you know, not perfect, but like the Dodgers were already the best and the top notch thing in the top team in MLB. They didn't need this. It's extra. It's going beyond what they needed. You're gilding the lily, which apparently comes from Shakespeare. So like everything else in the English language, that's good.
I still think they had some weaknesses they wanted to address. They addressed them. That's perfectly fine. But we do have a Patreon question about this topic too. So let's get to that. Tricky Henderson asking this week, the Dodgers, who cares? In terms of the Brewers being consistently good without unfurling a grotesque emission of cash, I'm happy. In terms of the Dodgers, Mets, Red Sox, and sad wallflower Toronto reaching desperately for every free agent, I'm also good with that. As Han Solo says, we're fine here, situation normal. How are you in regards to the Brewers offseason MO? And by you, I mean MKE tailgate people, best in the biz, I say, peace. So I guess, Ryan, comparing, obviously, the Dodgers throwing cash at whoever they want and seemingly getting them, and the Brewers sitting here as we record this towards the end of January with spring training, pitchers and catchers reporting in a few weeks, still not having signed a full MLB free agent. Are you happy with the way things operate here in the offseason?
I mean, I have learned, having gone through this enough times now to this point, I've learned to just be patient and wait and see what unfurls late, because most years they make a move after this. After where we sit right now, you know, the end of January, most years they make a move and do something to significantly alter what the team is going to look like for the following year. I don't love it. It gets tiresome. The same old arguments, the same old talking points. is Mark Attanasio cheap? Blah, 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 blah. That stuff does get tiresome, and it does, because it usually lacks nuance, and it's rehashing the same old crap over and over and over again. But the results have just been so good, and I think that one really good point they made on Effectively Wild when they were talking about this was like, you know, it's like we have to relearn this every year. Every year, everybody freaks out about, you know, the Dodgers or whoever, the Mets, are spending so much money, and oh, it's ruining baseball and whatever. And then, you know, by the time we get to September, you know, the Mets and their unbeatable juggernaut of their all-time record payroll, what was it, 2 years ago, didn't make the playoffs.
No, they're struggling for 85 wins.
Yeah,
like, come on.
And this last year, they snuck in sort of and then got hot and whatever. But it's like we have to relearn the same lessons every year, that like winning the offseason does not mean winning in even the regular season, let alone the postseason. It just, there isn't a big correlation there, that it what happens during the baseball regular season is largely a war of attrition. And then what happens in the postseason is, you know, a function more of randomness than anything else. So like we have to keep relearning the same lesson over and over again. And I'm trying to not ride the same roller coaster every year, and just try to remember what I remembered last summer and last fall. But it is hard and it's tiresome. So I get why people get kind of annoyed by it, but also I wish there was more of a general understanding and consensus that like baseball's salary structure is weird, and it doesn't the correlation between spending and winning is not that strong. It really just isn't very strong at all.
No, you keep telling yourself that, and then you slip up a couple of weeks later, and you have to remind yourself. And now we're sitting here at the end of January, and you're like, Paul DeYoung, hey, awesome. We do have a question about that later. But Spencer, I guess your thoughts, like, where do you fall on this? Obviously, there are two extremes here, right? Like the Mets and the Dodgers every winter splurging, and the Brewers reluctant to even give a full major league contract. I can understand where people get upset, but at the same time, the Brewers are probably still tops in their division right now. So do they need to do anything?
Yeah, I mean, I get it. People like the offseason because it can bring excitement. You can have these big moves that get everybody excited for the upcoming season.
Right.
But there's also this element of you don't just spend to spend. It doesn't help you. You can spend money and get worse in the process. It's not just anybody you add to this team by giving them money makes them a better team. It's not that simple. And frankly, while I've watched this offseason kind of happen in front of me, there have been very few moves that I've seen happen where I was like, yeah, that would have made sense for the Brewers. Like, I definitely could have seen them doing that and it making sense for them and it making them better. There haven't been many. There's still some names out there. I still don't see too many of them that make a ton of sense for the Brewers. And I'm not going to touch on those names now because, like you said, we do have a question kind of along those lines later. But it's not just everybody likes those moves to happen. For me, it doesn't matter because I will get joy from any move they make, like the Elvin Rodriguez deal. I looked into that for probably an hour on the day it happened. Like, that's how it's going to happen for me. Like, I'll get excited about anything and not necessarily agree with it, but I like looking into everything the Brewers do. And I think you can find some exciting, traits in everybody. But on the subject of the Dodgers, I'm more in agreement. I don't care. I don't really care what they do. I know why everybody gets annoyed by it. I get it, but it just doesn't bother me. I don't pay attention to it. I see it happen and I'm like, oh, funny. They added another guy. It's more funny to me when I'm like, oh, Scott for $75 million. Nice.
Why not?
All right.
Sure.
Good for you guys. But yeah, I don't know. For me, it doesn't matter. I want to see them perform in the season once it actually happens. And I think the Brewers are going to do that again. So the offseason has not bothered me much in general. And I think that I agree with Ryan more in terms of the conversation every single offseason gets tiresome, where it's the same talking points, the same things every single time. And then 162 games later, it's a different outcome. It's a different thing that happens. Those teams didn't do what everyone expected them to do. different team popped up. The Guardians weren't expected to be good last year. All of a sudden they're winning their division by a ton. Like this is all just talking points right now. It doesn't mean nearly as much as people always end up making it out to be.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm just mostly annoyed because the annoyance at the Dodgers seems to be coming out of the New York press. And it's like, come on, the Mets signed Juan Soto for $750 million. They're fine. Stop crying about this. Just because Hal Steinbrenner doesn't want to sign an extra guy to go over the luxury tax. Stop crying. It's fine. Deal with it. We've gotten used to it, clearly, judging by what you guys have said here in the Midwest. So it's fine. You can still compete. All right. Let's move on to other questions this week. We've got Jay Google asking, a couple of weeks back, both MLB Pipeline and Baseball America ran industry polls about where MLB organizations stood on a number of aspects when it comes to amateur player acquisition and development. On Pipeline, they were listed as being towards the top of the industry in just about every category, including drafting, developing, and internationally. But on Baseball America, they were listed as being among the quote-unquote least scout-friendly, along with Cleveland and Baltimore. How can both things be true, Ryan?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Jay. I appreciate it. So anyways, it is. This is an interesting one. So first off, we need to go back and we'll talk a little bit about that polling, because one of my favorite things every year now, especially now that the Brewers are really good at all this stuff, is when MLB Pipeline sends out and they get lots of responses. Like, I think it's close to like 100 responses they're pulling in. Does it say in here exactly how many they got? I don't see exactly a number, but they get a lot of responses to this. And basically what they are asking is, who are the best teams in baseball and all of this at that sort of thing. So like they ask like who the best farm system is, and the Brewers aren't in that one because they're a little bit down further on that one. But then, okay, which team drafts the best? The Brewers were tied with the Orioles at 10%. In fourth for that. The Dodgers were at 16, the Red Sox were at 14, Brewers and Orioles were tied at 10%. So they're up towards the top, in the top 5 teams in terms of drafting. And this is the opinion of other executives in baseball. So executives around the game. This is their opinion of that. Who does best on the international market? Padres are number 1, Dodgers are number 2, Brewers are number 3. So they are recognized now as being among the very best at working the international market. And this is not new. This has been this way for a few years now. Who does the best job of acquiring prospects in trades? As you might expect there, Tampa Bay runs away with that one. But the Brewers are third behind the Nationals and the Rays, and then the Nationals, and then the Brewers at 6.3. So basically they're good at working the draft, the international market, and the trade market to get guys. Which team has the most underrated farm system? The Brewers win that one at 16%. So they were considered the most underrated farm system. Which team hoards prospects the most? The Brewers were up kind of towards the top on this one, but they were tied with teams like Boston, LA, the Dodgers, I should say. Seattle is on here. St. Louis is on here. Tampa's on here. So which team hoards prospects the most? Now, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. Which team develops pitchers the best? The Brewers were in the also receiving votes category here, meaning they were behind Cleveland, Seattle, LA, Tampa, Detroit, Houston, New York, Pittsburgh. The Brewers were in the also receiving votes category here, which I found interesting because in the past, in recent years, they've been more up towards the top. So they're getting votes here, but they're not up towards the very top of this one. But which team develops hitters the best? The Brewers were actually in the not the others or yeah, in the others receiving votes category here. They were 5th on this one, and so they were basically by this one. And this is where I want to stop a little bit and talk about this a little bit.
This is where people might go like, "Wait a minute."
Yeah, we talked about this in our group chat when this came out a couple weeks ago, right? We were talking about this one. But yeah, basically what the industry consensus is the Brewers are good. They're among the best at both developing pitchers and hitters, but they're a little bit better at developing hitters than they are at pitchers. Spencer, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think you don't have as much of a recent example as you did the last few, where it was like, oh yeah, they recently developed Woodruff, Peralta, Burns, all these guys. There really hasn't been a true homegrown starting pitcher developed recently that's stuck around and been able to make starts consistently from the Brewers. So I get it to an extent. I think development includes a lot more than just minor leagues. I think there's a lot of MLB development that happens, and obviously the Brewers are very, very good at that. They get the most out of a lot of guys once they make it. But, Gasser was probably on his way to being the first, somebody that someone would actually point to and be like, okay, mostly homegrown. Obviously, he was traded for, but he spent his last 2 years in the minors with the Brewers, and he was looking really solid as a starter in MLB. So those types of arms obviously are still going to get attention, but you look at the top prospect lists, I mean, they're littered with position players towards the top for the last couple of years. And most of the people who have been graduating as number one guys, you've got Churio, you've got Terang, Frelick, Mitchell, all these guys graduating into MLB. So I think as they look back on it, and I think that's mostly what those types of polls are probably, most teams are looking back and going, oh yeah, okay, they've been having a lot of major leaguers come through as position players, and maybe a little less from the pitching side than they used to. So a couple teams maybe take them off their votes or whatever. But I still think the Brewers are just doing a very good job in both regards. So it doesn't really matter to me what the poll says overall. But I also think maybe they just haven't had, the same type of talent in the minors that they did for a few years. And that always helps too. I mean, you can only develop talent so far. And I think they do a pretty good job of maximizing arms still. It's just maybe you haven't had a guy who had a ceiling like Burns did and Woodruff did come through recently. Mizorowski's the one with the highest ceiling of all of them, but there was always a very big risk, no matter where he ended up, that he could end up in the pen. And we still don't know that's for sure the case, but it's certainly trending that way. So I agree kind of with how they did it. I think I would probably lean towards the position player side of things right now, but I definitely also agree that they're still getting, or I still think it's reasonable they're still getting votes on the pitching side, because I think they do a good job there. It's just you don't have the same examples to point to that you did a few years ago.
Yeah, and I sort of imagine that the way that this is being done, because this is being done by MLB Pipeline, I think they really are trying to focus, like when they talk about pitching development, they are talking about minor leaguers more than they're talking about,
yeah,
some veteran coming in. Like, they're not necessarily giving the Brewers credit for, the Colin Rays or the Brian Hudsons of the world.
Right.
They're not really giving credit for that. This is more about giving credit to bringing guys up through the system. Like, Gasser would be a guy that they would get more credit for in this than that. So, yeah, I think that the other thing that this is going to, the difference of this and why it's showing is, for the executives, they're going to be much more living in the present of this, whereas we're going to be more inclined to look back further and still be talking about, how great it was that they developed Brandon Woodruff and Corbin Burns and Freddie Peralta, all these guys. And in reality, that was like a decade ago. Like, like that,
Sure.
that happened a decade ago. And so we're sort of still living off of that in some ways. But they've also just had some guys, Gasser getting hurt, Aaron Ashby's career being derailed by this injury, like that was kind of the next guy in line. We thought he was going to be the next guy here. And it, for a while did look like that was going to be the case, but then, shoulder injury, and that's the kind of stuff that does happen sometimes.
I think real quick too, when I see something like this, and obviously I'm more, generally looking at the overall state of things and like, oh, who's coming up? You guys are much more ingrained in the actual development through the minors. So when I see something like, oh, MLB executives think the Brewers are really good at developing hitters, my brain, similarly to what you were saying about the Peralta, Woodruff, Burns stuff of like being like, oh, obviously they're better at developing pitchers. My hitting development brain goes to, well, they broke Keston Hiura. And similarly, that's like 5 years ago now, right? But I guess if you can talk about that a little bit, obviously, like Jackson Churio, generational talent. If you can develop that, you're going to get a lot of credit, right? I'm guessing maybe a lot of MLB executives, like, they have a budding superstar at age 20. They knocked it out of the park with that one. I guess anything to that where it's like, speak to that a little bit, because like some of us are still thinking they can't develop guys, but they are getting guys to the majors, which is a huge part of development in the first place.
Well, and there's another thing going on here is it does a little bit of a disservice to call it hitting development, because there's a lot more to it than just developing a guy's ability to hit. The Brewers are really good at developing all-around position players. They've been doing it for a while now, but because Bryce Terang isn't, well, I guess Bryce Terang isn't Ricky Weeks. He's not out there, slugging the ball around. And like Sal Frelick ain't Corey Hart. He's not gonna, pop 25 home runs a year. I think that it sort of gets lost. The values of a different shape than what we're used to. Brewers fans are sort of a condition of Brewers fans, especially of a certain age, Jaymes and I especially, like we're conditioned to sort of expect our hitters should be sluggers. That's
Ryan
what
Braun, Prince Fielder, Corey Hart, back in the day, they knew how to hit.
Yep. Yeah. We are sort of hardwire programmed to think of it.
God, we're
that
so
way.
old. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, somebody who's a little bit younger than us, like Spencer, maybe your generation is more open to this than like the fact that they're developing all around players, because we did go through times when it was like, we have some problems developing guys who can actually play defense. Because we had some pretty bad defenders in that, that bumper crop of the Jack Z era. Ricky Weeks took a long time to figure out second base and really only ever got to be kind of average-ish at it. Prince Fielder was a terrible first baseman the entire time he was here. And I was reminded of that when I was watching this week, the game 162 from 2008, that his error was the reason the Cubs scored early on in that game. But Fielder was a terrible defender.
But he moves so well for a guy that big, Ryan.
I may have made that argument a lot. And so, Steve, you're probably yelling at your radio right now, go, you better acknowledge that you said that crap. Because I definitely said that crap. I definitely did. So, but just like we have to acknowledge that, like, Sal Frelick isn't some impressive, like, hitting specimen. You don't look at him and go, oh, yeah, that's a hitter. No, but last year he was like worth 2 wins because he was just a really good all-around player. He was just good. He did a good job getting on base, or a solid job getting on base, and played spectacular defense in the outfield. And so when you add it all up, he was like a 2-win player, and that's, pretty damn good, especially when you're drafting in the middle of the first round. So, like, it's not – this is one of those things that just gets tricky sometimes. It just gets tricky because we sometimes are talking about different things, honestly, when we're looking at these.
We're also not in the 2008 to 2012 run environment that we were back then as well. That factors into it a bit.
Hugely.
Part of that.
Yes.
Massive. All right. Michael Parr next up this week asking, where do you bat Jackson Chourio this year? Do you have him protecting Contreras in the lineup, in the cleanup spot rather, or maybe reverse that? With Adames gone, there's not an obvious cleanup hitter. I feel like it's the official position of this podcast that batting orders don't matter. But Spencer, where would you bat Chourio this year?
Yeah, well, I stand with what the podcast believes in, but I would like, for me, the only part of the batting order that matters is getting guys up as much as possible, getting as many at-bats for your best hitters. So for me, it's Chourio, Yelich, and Contreras. I want hitting 1, 2, 3 in some order. It doesn't really matter to me. I think Yelich or Chourio in the 1-2 spot makes plenty of sense, but that is pretty much where I land. I think that's maximizing at-bats and trying to not lessen the threat of speed by putting guys in certain spots behind each other is really the only stuff I care about when it comes to a lineup.
Yeah, I can get behind an idea of like Bryce Terang being up at the top when he's actually been going well, when he is getting on base, to have that at the top, to have that, because he does bring like a certain level of discipline to things. And he is also just obviously a base stealing threat, so he can move on the bases. And when he does get on base, he steal 50 last year? I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, he stole exactly 50 last year. Yeah. So those sorts of things. But yeah, 316 on base percentage, which is what he ended at last year. He was probably hitting in the leadoff spot more often than he needed to after things were already starting to come down. So yeah, my biggest thing is to get those 3 guys you're talking about. I want them in the first 4. I can handle some other nonsense, some old school managery
Pat
crap.
Murphy nonsense.
Yeah.
Yeah. For
Sal
the
Frelick
record, I
in the
believe
leadoff
Durang's
spot. Yeah.
going to lead off.
Yeah.
I can get with that, but as long as the main chunk, your best guys should be up there in some sort of an order. Yeah, that's absolutely. I would personally, if I had it, Chourio leading off, especially given that I'm expecting a kind of a bump in power from him this year. Maybe I don't want him leading off. I think Chourio might be better suited for the second spot, but that's such a good spot for Yelich because he's such a good all-around player and is, immaculate at getting on base. Maybe Yelich belongs back in the leadoff spot. We had some success with that a few years ago, but whatever. As long as, you get Contreras, you get Yelich, you get Chourio in the top 4, I'm not going to complain.
M. Santana, a big picture question this week, asking who on the 2025 Brewers will have a breakout season. I guess feel free to define breakout however you want to, Spencer. But who do you see taking a step forward? And does Chourio count?
This is a tough one. Honestly, Sal Frelick gave me hope on the bat with the homer in the playoffs. I am hoping that led to an awakening in terms of saying, like, you know what, I can swing the bat hard and things will still be okay.
Just do that.
Yeah. And when he did swing the bat, Jack Stern wrote a really good article about it this offseason. And it talked about how when he did swing the bat hard, which he was capable of, he showed the ability to do, things went really well. So maybe just doing that a little bit more consistently, maybe trading a tiny bit of bat to ball for the willingness to swing a little bit harder, a little bit more consistently. I saw it in the minors. I watched him in AAA. He was a better hitter than he's been in MLB. And I think there's been a level of like hesitancy to sell out for stuff. I would like to see him do that a little bit more. I think there's a decent chance it's going to happen. And thus, like we already said, he was a 2-WAR player without the bat. The bat was borderline at league average last year. But if he jumps to like a 110 WRC plus or something, first, that'd be awesome for the lineup. He'd probably be my leadoff hitter in that scenario. And then 2, he would probably be a 3+ WAR guy, which is a really, really good player. And other guys that, are within reason. I think Oliver Dunn is within reason if he gets as much playing time as I think he might. And as much as I'm still not totally sold on it, Garrett Mitchell does have the ability to do it. I saw some video of him working at Driveline, working on the very specific issues he has there. That gave me a little hope. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with that one. But those would probably be my 3 that stand out.
Mitchell's a little bit tough because he's in the situation where he's been pretty good when he's been healthy so far. Yeah. So to like break out and go to the next level, there's been a whole debate about this on effectively.
He needs to play 140 games. Just do it once, please.
That would just be a breakout in and of itself, right?
Yes.
Like that would just be, So that the one that I'm going to go with here is Joey Ortiz. And he already had a pretty good year last year. 3.1 Fangraphs WAR. But that was as, basically being a 104 WRC plus hitter over the course of the full year. But we saw him before the injury occurred. And then, so in the first half, we saw him be much more productive than that. He was running, Spencer, somewhere near 130, right? In terms of WRC plus early on.
Yeah, through June, it was around 125, I think.
Okay. Yeah. So he was, I don't have the splits on Fangraphs up, but that sounds right. If you could get a full season like that out of him, at short, especially, you could be talking about a real big jump in overall value. And I guess that's what the next question is more specifically asking, but I could see Ortiz being a breakout guy. Because I don't think he fully broke out last year. He got attention. People are aware of him. He is definitely on the radar now, but I don't think he's broken out into a true star status the way he could. So give me that as like a potential breakout. But I agree with the Frelick call as well. That would be another one.
Through June, we were talking about Joey Ortiz as a dark horse rookie of the year candidate. And then, Plus Keens debuted and blew that out of the water. But, it was, like you guys were saying, he was great the first part of the season, and then neck injuries, back, whatever it was, took a toll. Hard to keep up the offense that way, at least. But yeah, you referenced the next question. So Jeffrey Emenecker asking kind of similarly, which three players would you guess see the largest growth in WAR this year over last? So just to remind everybody, William Contreras, at least on Fangraphs, finished tops at 5.4 WAR. Willie Adames, he gone, doesn't matter. Jackson Chourio finished at 3.9, which is at least higher than I realized he did finish on Fangraphs. Jory Ortiz finished at 3.1. Christian Yelich was at 3. And then you've got Turang at 2.5, Peralta 2.3, Tobias Myers 2.2, Garrett Mitchell 1.8, which again, very high for only 224 plate appearances last year. So I guess maybe Spencer, is that the key? If Garrett Mitchell stays healthy, big WAR increase just based on the defense alone too, and the base running as well.
Yeah, I think he's definitely one that you would have to watch just because of the lack of sample size compared to what some other people have. I'm really hoping he can close that hole at the top of the swing. Not close it, even just shrink that hole at the top of the zone, and I'll start feeling pretty good about him because he's shown he can pretty much do everything else. I just worry that the one flaw he has can be somewhat of a fatal one for you offensively. We've seen it with guys before.
Keston Hira, yes.
So we'll see. I mean, he has it in him for sure. He has the ability to be a 5 WAR guy, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if he did it. But I also think it wouldn't shock me if it did not go that way at all next season. So big range for him. I think Frelick, again, has a chance to jump just with a better offensive season. Dunn, similar to Mitchell, just would need to play a lot more, and he's projected for a lot of playing time, so that could be one. And I'll throw out one pitcher, Nick Mears. I just feel like Nick Mears is going – it's not going to be a huge jump really, but in terms of like the scale that relievers are on, I think he could make a jump towards close to 1 WAR, Fangraphs WAR, and it wouldn't surprise me at all. I think he's going to have a good season.
Yeah, just to go back to Ortiz for a minute, because I do have the numbers now. Spencer, you said 125 in the first half. He had a 126 WRC plus, and then in the second half, it fell to 79.
I mean, it did fail.
Yeah. There was a big drop off there, especially 369 on base percentage in the first half, and it fell to 283 in the second half. So,
and that was batting mostly in like the 9th or 8th spot too, because Murph wouldn't bat him higher than that. So yeah, so something there, and there was the injury in there because didn't he get injured right around July 4th? So right around like early July. Did he miss right before the All-Star break?
I believe so. I think he went on the IL into the All-Star break.
Okay. Yep, that would make sense then. Okay, so yeah. I up and down with Spencer there. That's all good. Yep, I agree.
Can Rhys Hoskins maybe finish in positive WAR and that be a jump? I don't know. I guess he was 0.1 on Fangraphs, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
the projections we talked about, Pacoda keep projecting him for like 1+ WAR, and that's a monstrous jump. That would require some passable defense, I think, or just a monster offensive season. But I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, more on base from him would be really big. Like if he could get back to kind of where he was on base wise, that would do a lot for this offense, and it would solidify him to hit. It would make sense for him to kind of hit in that like 5 spot then at that point.
PJ Wessel's next asking, this is really interesting. Do you want more innings from Brandon Woodruff or Miz and Yoho combined this season? So I guess you want Spencer Woodruff to have a relatively normal starter load, let's say 100 innings, or do you want to see Miz and Yoho just dominate and even if it's out of the bullpen?
Yeah, I mean, if Woodruff can give a lot of innings, I think that would be a great sign on how he's doing and how he's feeling. So I think that would be a good thing for the Brewers. So I guess I would technically prefer that one. I think there's a pretty decent chance you get more innings between Miz and Yoho. That would not surprise me at all. We just really do not know what we're going to get out of Woodruff. But I think both of those two are going to see time in MLB and a decent amount of it. So if Woodruff gets more than them, I would assume that means things were going pretty decently for him, and I would prefer that outcome, I guess, because I think that helps the Brewers the most.
Yeah, this is one of those ones where, like, here's the deal. If the Brewers get more innings out of Brandon Woodruff than they do out of Miz and Yoho, I'm going to go and say that they made the playoffs this year. Like, I think that would be a pretty solid bet. Like, if you get more innings out of Brandon Woodruff than you do out of the combination of Mizorowski and Yoho, that tells you a lot of things. One, it tells you Brandon Woodruff is getting innings. Two, it tells you that Miz and Yoho, they didn't have to like start throwing a bunch of innings at them that way. Now, the reverse doesn't necessarily have to be true. If Miz and Yoho get more innings than Woodruff, that doesn't mean that the team has to be, foundering at that point. But I would then have questions about, well, what is the reason? What is going on?
What's wrong with Woodruff? Yeah.
What's wrong with Woodruff? That sort of thing. But if you're getting more innings, because I feel pretty good that we're going to see like somewhere between 50 and 100 innings of Miz and Yoho this year, like kind of regardless. I think that there's a pretty good chance of that, barring, some pretty significant injuries or whatever. I think we're going to see a decent number of innings out of those guys this year. If you're getting more out of Woodruff, I'm going to feel very, very good about where you're at. So I guess I would go that direction.
Ian Pomplin asking, Pratt, Lara, Mizorowski, and Yoho all received non-roster invites to spring training. How do these guys profile? What's each of their ceilings and their floors? Any reasonable expectations to have for the four of them for this upcoming season? So we kind of touched on Miz and Yoho, Ryan. Pratt, Lara, I'd be surprised, I guess, if either of those made an impact this year. But, Pratt was kind of a fast riser at the end of the year, from what I understand.
Yeah, so Pratt was a guy who they did call up to Double A at the very end of the season to play in the postseason. So they had that level of trust in him. But yeah, I don't see Pratt being a guy who's going to be in the big leagues. I don't see Lara as being a guy who's going to be in the big leagues this year, because that's kind of what he's asking expectations to have for the upcoming season. But Pratt was a guy, JJ Cooper shouted him out on the Baseball America podcast that I was listening to while driving home today. He said he picked Pratt, and actually then the other guy.
Zaire Hope.
Yeah, he picked Zaire Hope. Yeah, but then the guy, Jeff Ponce, picked Mate as his guy. That was the question. Who do you think could be the number one prospect in baseball next year? Mate got a shout from Ponce, and then Pratt got a shout from JJ Cooper. So that was pretty impressive. Wild. Yeah, that was, to have two guys get named to that was something. So, yeah. And then, Mizorowski and Yoho, I think, Spencer, why don't you go ahead? I think we're going to see both those guys this year.
Yeah, I expect to see both of them at some point, assuming they're healthy. I guess to answer the other parts of that, I think Miz and Yoho probably profile as more relievers next year. Yoho almost certainly, Mizorowski not quite as certainly, but most likely going to be a reliever. Different arms. I mean, Mizorowski's a huge velo guy, big time stuff. Yoho falls into more of like the Devin Williams changeup, the really big run on his fastball, but it's low 90s, and then a breaking ball. So totally different pitchers, but both probably going to help more out of the pen next year, I would guess. Lara is a really, really good defensive outfielder, very small right now, hasn't shown a ton of power or anything yet. But he does, like I said, he plays great defense. He has a pretty good arm. He's at least shown an ability to tap into some of the power, but it's not very consistent. And I think he's got to get back to probably a little bit better just overall bat to ball than he showed this past season. So we will see on him. My guess is he'll be in Double A, even though he wasn't a great year at High A. I think they're going to end up putting him in Double A. Pratt should be in Double A, and like Ryan said, I mean, my guess is he'll see Triple A at some point next year. I'd be pretty surprised if we see him in MLB next year. I think that would mean either things went extremely well for him or things did not go well in the Brewers infield at all, or both. But he won the Gold Glove, minor league Gold Glove. Who's to say how valuable that really is? But he won that at the shortstop position. He's got a pretty good chance of sticking there. The bat's pretty good. It just hasn't shown a ton of power yet. But he started tapping into it in High A. The 90th percentile exit velocity is not great, but for his age, it's pretty much average. So he's still somebody who can add some of the power just by, maturity and development in terms of his body. So they're all fun. It's just, I think Miz and Yoho are probably the ones to really not worry about, but actually pay attention to in terms of MLB exposure next year.
Yeah, and I do want to point out Lara's kind of like a fifth outfielder in an era when teams don't generally have fifth outfielders.
Yeah.
Like that's more of a because he was the guy who probably would play center field for you, but not really hit a whole lot. So kind of a defensive base running sort of sub. And that was something that they used to have in baseball and have less of now because everybody's
Yeah.
a pitcher now.
Yeah. His current ceiling kind of seems Blake Perkins-ish because he's, switch hitter, could play really good defense, do some base running, maybe hit enough if he's forced into the lineup. But that's probably more how I view his ceiling right now. And, Perkins is valuable, but that's, odds of him actually getting there are kind of small, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. At age 19 last year at High A, Wisconsin, Luis Lara, 45 steals, but also caught 14 times.
Mhm.
Not the high success rate you want to see. Also, Spencer mentioned he's small. I don't know if how many people really realize how small, but he's listed at 5'7", 155.
Mhm.
He is tiny. He is a small person. So obviously that brings into question the power potential and how much authority you can really hit with. Even more so than like Salfrey. Like he OPS like 650 something at High A last year. So very specialized skill set. Let's just say that. All right. Lucroy Suitcase asking which non-prospect minor leaguers could you see having large amounts of playing time this year and why? Spencer, you mentioned Ollie Dunn. I figure he probably qualifies in this category. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think one name I keep forgetting about is Isaac Collins. I do think Isaac Collins is a pretty interesting player. He was very good in AAA last year, and it wasn't just surface stats. It was he hit the ball hard. He did a lot of really good things. He's a switch hitter. He can play all over the field. It wouldn't shock me if he ends up finding his way onto the roster again to start the year. But he'd also, I would imagine, be one of the first ones up if, any utility type guy or even one of the outfielders maybe goes down. And then on the pitching side, I think Chad Patrick is kind of the obvious one in terms of somebody who doesn't get much actual prospect attention. He was so good in AAA last year. He got added to the 40-man. It seems pretty likely we will see him at one point. And if he performs, I would imagine he stays and just keeps getting outs in one form or fashion. It might be out of the pen. It might be as a starter, but I would imagine he's going to get a chance. And then it's just about how he does. But yeah, I mean, I'd throw out Davy Garcia as a potential, Grant Wolfram, Grant Anderson. I don't know if he even counts because he's been in MLB a decent amount, but all those names, it's pen guys mostly, I think, who usually end up taking that type of, role. Tobias Myers was probably the one exception recently.
Yeah, I've thrown Connor Thomas into that group as well, but you hit all the ones I really wanted to talk about, or at least name checked them. So yeah.
Jay Google asking, at this point, what's third base looking like this year? Like platoon all around with Durbin and Dunn. Roster Resource has Dunn projected at 430 plus ABs, which seems like a lot. Or are we still looking at like a Paul DeYoung signing or a trade like Justin Foscue? Ryan, what do you think? Still time to figure this out, but time's ticking.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is. Boy, that 430 plate appearances for Dunn, that's a lot. I would take the under on that. I still think their primary third baseman who is going to get more plate appearances than anybody else this year at third is not currently on the roster. I'll go with that. Though the other thing that could potentially change that is like Ha-Sung Kim coming in to play shortstop and bumping Ortiz at least, for a year back to third base. I could see that as well. So technically he would then, like Ortiz would be on the roster, but that would be because somebody else has come in. I still think that's more likely than like Dunn getting that many, but I could see it. Dunn, there is something there. There's things to like about Dunn's game, but yeah, I just, there's still enough people out there. There's still enough potential names to fit in at the third base spot that like, yeah, DeYoung is a guy I could see.
Ollie just needs to make more contact, man. He had some flashes last year. Obviously, you saw some of the light tower power when he did make contact, but it was rough going early on, and I can't blame them for kind of making him figure it out after that. All right, Price Trozen asking one of our last questions this week. Your next show will be in February, and that means players reporting to Arizona is getting closer. Are there any spring training player storylines you'll be watching out for? And Spencer, let's not do the best shape of his life stuff because that's the next question.
Yep.
So,
Right.
what are you looking to get out of spring training? What are you watching? Is it like how the pen shakes out in the back end? Is it who plays in the infield? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's similar to what it always is. I think one of the big ones will be what do we see from Woodruff early on. It's not going to be something I care deeply about what I see, but
Yeah.
it'll just be something I'm watching for. I want to get Woodruff news in spring. I think we've been waiting forever for it, so I'd like to hear about him. Yeah, I think the infield, how that kind of shakes out, is definitely going to be part of it. I'll be very interested in the minor leaguers who are up for spring training and just seeing how they, compete and how they do in their opportunities. And then I do think the pen, mostly just the new additions to the pen. I'm always curious, what are they working on? Brewer Fanatic's going to have people down there, including Jack. So I'm sure Jack will ask all the nerdy questions that I'm hoping to get out of some of these guys. But yeah, it'll be spring to me. I don't really care much about results either way. I just really want to see, how guys look, people getting back into shape. I guess I should throw out, how Yelich looks and is moving and all of that stuff when he gets his opportunity. That might even be the easiest one to see from the naked eye and just see how he's moving. But yeah, I guess just all of those things. It's nothing super specific for me. I just kind of tune in and find out what we find out and go from there.
Yeah, I mean, assuming we don't see an ad, and like I said, I think it's coming, but if there isn't an ad at third base, be watching who's playing over there, who is getting the reps.
Right.
Like that's
Sal.
that's gonna don't do that, Jaymes. No. Oh, somebody brought that up at work, and I'm like, no, he's such a good outfielder. Why? No. What? But anyways, yeah, that would be one big thing. The Yelich, I was gonna bring up, you guys got to it, but the Yelich back thing, just to see, like, is he swinging the bat well? Is he able
playing
to
the
rotate?
outfield?
Yeah, all of those things. Yeah, so those will be big ones to watch. And then just wanting to see how it's always hard with pitchers, especially early in camp, because you can't really know how much they're trying, how much they're tinkering, what they're messing around with. But I would sure feel better if guys like, say, DL Hall came out looking sharp and would, crisp from the beginning. That would be nice to see. Or the what does Brian Hudson's stuff look like? That would be another big one. Like, because he was such a big part of their really great bullpen last year until like July, and then it all went to crap.
Yeah. Actually,
It's
one
weird.
I thought of, Ashby, is he actually stretching out? Are they actually stretching out Ashby in spring? That'll be one I'll be watching for sure.
That's a good one. Yep.
Absolutely. All right. Brian Polakowski asking, unofficial prop bet, which Brewer is your top candidate for a quote unquote best shape of my life quote upon arriving to Arizona? And Michael Parr responded, props to Avi Garcia for getting that in 2021, but actually being visibly 30 pounds lighter or so for once. Everyone believed the hype. So, yeah, that was impressive. And then Avi proceeded to lose all of his power. But hey, got the bag with Miami, so that's fine. I guess, yeah. Spencer, let's start with you. Who's your bet for best shape of his life?
I feel like I'm body shaming by picking people here, but Rhys Hoskins is probably one that I have a feeling we're going to hear about just because he's coming off the ACL. He's further removed. I think he's a guy who probably could be in better shape. Similarly, I would bet Woodruff has something along those lines. And honestly, when we saw Woodruff in the dugout or hanging around the team,
he's skinny. He lost a lot of weight last year. Yeah.
So I don't even know if it would technically be, but last time we saw him pitch compared to that, he might be talking about he's in better shape. So those are the two that come to mind for me.
Yeah, right. I think those are good shouts. So we had the beefiest roster in MLB last year, right? Or was it 2 years ago that we had the
maybe a couple years ago?
Boys? It had to have been a rowdy team.
Yeah, right. Well, and like we also had Vogelbach in there at one point,
Bryce Wilson,
not that long ago. Yeah, Bryce Wilson. Yeah, so we had some true beef boys, but Yeah, like Wolfram is 240 pounds. I'm just looking at the 40-man roster, looking at listed weights, but he's also 6'8". So like, yeah, when you're 6'8", like 240, that carries different. Like that's not. I wish I was 6'8" for purposes such as that. And I'm not short, but I'm also not 240. So
no.
But yeah, like this is not as beefy a boy roster as we had come used to. I mean, Koenig and like Hudson, but they're also like they're giant people too. So yeah. McGill, I guess. Well, again, 6'8", like
6'8". Yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah. So
I don't know if I believe Savali's 215 or whatever he's listed as. Maybe.
No.
He was at least 230 last year. Looking at that uniform, yeah.
6'2",
exactly.
215. Oh hell no. No.
Maybe when you started in the minors, my guy, but no, not anymore.
Yeah.
Hey, Lance Lynn's still out there, so maybe they sign Lance Lynn and improve that average weight a little bit, bump it up.
So speaking of heights, we should mention this real quick because they are going to be measuring people in spring training because they're going to be doing the review challenge during spring training thing. This got mentioned on Effectively Wild. They brought that up. So yeah. And we also should probably mention here before we stop CC Sabathia. I know you briefly kind of said, yeah, he went in the Hall of Fame this year, but we should probably mention CC Sabathia because this is a big part of the Brewers story. It's hard to imagine anybody doing more in less time to make themselves like a piece of a franchise's history than what CC Sabathia did in 2008. I mean, it's the ratio of the amount of time spent to the impact had has got to be as good as it gets because when MLB Network was showing games from the recent Hall of Fame inductees, one of the first ones they went to is that game 162 in 2008. Yeah. So the impact there is big. Yeah.
Retire 52. He did more than Raleigh did. I'm just going to say it.
Yeah. Kurt and JR were going back and forth on this a little bit.
No, I'm telling you, he's look at what he did in those 17 games. Compare it to the year and a half, 2 years Raleigh had. He's right there, including like strikeouts. That's how impressive those games were. If you're on the younger side of our audience, and I feel like our audience skews a little older, but if you're on the younger side and you don't remember 2008, that was freaking incredible. Yeah. And to the point where it came up in his MLB Network interviews after the fact, like Brian Kenny was asking him, like, that was insane. Like, how mad were your agents? And he was like, yeah, my agents were pissed. I just didn't answer their calls. I was like, screw it, I'm going. And that's why I love CC. To this day, he's just, it's hard to put into words exactly like what that summer was like. Just first of all, knowing that the Brewers landed somebody like him. Like, you have to understand, the Brewers did not have pitchers like that forever. Like, it was the first time I could remember them actually having a good starting pitcher that wasn't Ben Sheets. And totally worth it. Glad he got in. Retire 52. That's all I gotta say. Just paper over 34. That's fine. I guess in terms of best shape of his life, I kind of wonder if like Christian Yelich shows up and is like, I can actually work out because my back doesn't hurt. Maybe that has an impact. I don't know. We'll see.
But like if Christian Yelich shows up lighter than he was in the past, I guess that would
concerning.
It would be concerning because that would mean the muscle's gone because that dude didn't.
You
have
want
any
him to be more ripped.
Lose.
You want him to be ripped because he could actually lift weights for a change. Yeah, exactly.
That dude didn't have like fat to lose. There were the percentage body fat on Christian Yelich couldn't have been more than like what is it, like 2% is like he couldn't have been.
He's a thin dude already. Yeah, if he lost weight, we're in trouble. And you mentioned the actual measurements for ABS testing. Is this where we're going to find out where Sal Frelick's actually like 5'6" or something like that? Because I don't know.
Yeah, they were looking in particular to the Astros to see, Bregman
Oh, sure.
Because he's listed at 6, and then Altuve. How tall is Jose Altuve actually?
Altuve, actually, yeah, that's a good one.
Because I think he's listed at 5'6", and everybody's like, ain't no 5'6".
Durbin's a small guy too, right? So we'll find out if Durbin's actually taller than 5'5". I don't know.
Yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah, there's some things to watch like that.
Yeah. All right. Well, plenty of good spring training storylines as we get closer and closer to pitchers and catchers reporting in a couple of weeks. Thanks for all the questions this week. Reminder, patrons at patreon.com/MKE tailgate get question priority every week, both on this podcast and on reporting as eligible. Bump that up to $5 a month, only a few more dollars a month. You get the extra podcast content, especially from Ryan and Spencer, as we get closer to baseball season here. Definitely worth that level as well. So even if you're not a patron, if you don't have the few bucks to spare to throw our way, totally understandable. You can support us another way. Go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else you're listening to this. Give us a 5-star review if you can. And while you're there, please be sure to hit the subscribe or follow button to make sure you never miss an episode. So that'll do it for this week. I don't know. I say this every week. Maybe next week we'll have a major league signing to talk about. Fingers crossed, even if it's Paul DeJong. Please, just give us Paul DeJong, something to talk about. Please, Brewers, I'm begging you. That'll do it. Spencer, thanks for jumping in. Reminder, check out Spencer and Jack Stern on the Brewer Fanatic podcast as well. This podcast also getting cross-posted over at Brewer Fanatic. We appreciate that so much. Spencer and Jack, your episodes typically come out on Fridays, right? That's when you do them. So plenty of time, plenty of space, as Ryan always likes to say, between us and that one. Tune into that, if you will. And we'll see you next time here on Milwaukee's Tailgate. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you next time. Stay well.
Fair weather, it's not what I am, even though the zip code has changed. I might smile and joy when I'm unemployed. Your soul can't be rearranged. It's hard to understand. So hard to understand. Fair weather, fair